Hi, I'm Melissa Roddy. In this film, I've set out to do nothing less than to turn the conventional understanding of Afghanistan and Pakistan on its head. By using documentary evidence and first-hand testimony, I will demonstrate how American and later British policy in the region has been more in keeping with Pakistani interests than Afghan, or even our own.
The NATO countries, they won't kill their soldiers for nothing, you know. So if that's happened, then I'm afraid that the American will be left alone there, and unfortunately they will also pack up and will leave us again to the mercy of our neighbors and the mercy of the warlords.
I think that the important point is that the United States, from my understanding, cut a deal early on with the PACs that the PACs insisted on.
So what was that deal? It was a 30-30-40 split between two oil companies in the state of Pakistan. Occidental Petroleum and Union Texas Petroleum each got a 30% share of the Badin oil fields located in eastern Pakistan. Union Texas former controller said this was really quite a sweet deal. He compared it to Indonesia, where the state retains 80% of the field, while a dozen or so companies compete for the remaining 20% of whatever comes out of the ground. So what did Oxy and Union Texas have to do to get and keep such a honey of a deal?
The PACs were basically given carte blanche in the distribution of the aid. So the United States agreed to that.
Initially, for the first couple of years, there was a rather silly effort to maintain credible deniability, that is to say, to pretend that the United States was not, in fact, providing these supplies, military and humanitarian. But of course, everyone knew that we were, so that was a pretty weak excuse the CIA offered. I and many members of Congress constantly lobbied, importuned the White House and the State Department and the CIA to take more direct control, and to determine which groups should get which weapons and when.
These are the 7 Mujahideen faction leaders to whom Pakistan distributed U.S. assistance from the late 1970s to early 1990s. 6 out of these 7 men were ruthless, radical Islamic fundamentalists. Divide and conquer, a classic strategy which has been very effectively used by Pakistan to destabilize Afghanistan. Among the most notorious human rights abusers of these Tanzim leaders is Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, a practitioner of Saudi-style Wahhabi Islam, the same brand of Islam practiced by the Taliban, which bears no resemblance to the moderate Islam native to Afghanistan. Sayyaf has a long history of working closely with Saudi Arabia, and one soldier informed me how disturbed she and her fellow soldiers were to learn about his track record after they had helped to reinstall him to power upon overthrow of the Taliban. Rashid Dostum, a former general in the Afghan Communist Army, and famous for frequently switching sides to whomever appears to have advantage, is another ne'er-do-well and ruthless drug lord who worked with the U.S. to overthrow the Taliban in 2001, and who now operates like a mafia don from within the Afghan government. Among the recipients of American largesse during the 1980s was Jalaluddin Haqqani. Haqqani was such a close friend of Congressman Charlie Wilson's that in the late 1990s, Wilson personally had Haqqani's brother brought to the U.S. for treatment of a broken leg. Now Jalaluddin Haqqani is a Pakistan-based leader of the Taliban, from which position he directs the killing of U.S. and NATO soldiers, along with conducting his decades-long career of abusing Afghan civilians. And then there was Gulbuddin. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar began committing acts of terrorism in Afghanistan on behalf of Pakistan in the mid-1970s. Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, rewarded him by making his Hezb-e-Islami Hekmatyar party the largest recipient of U.S. aid, military, financial, and humanitarian, during the 1980s and early 1990s. But no good deed goes unpunished, and now Gulbuddin, who is thought to be living in Pakistan, coordinates his anti-Afghan and anti-coalition violence with al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Curiously, despite this, one former intelligence officer informed me that Gulbuddin is still on the CIA payroll. This document from 1981 is a set of instructions signed by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar to his commanders. Among other things, he orders them, when inside Afghanistan, if they should happen upon any of their Mujahideen allies from any of the other 6 parties, quote, the other parties should be eliminated by military force, close quote, and commanders can report the location of the other militias to the Russian invaders, close quote. Divide and conquer.
My husband, of course, was very honored, and he said, I would like to, but I have companies in 26 countries, and there's just no way that I have the time to give that you need. Why don't you take Joanne? Well, they were absolutely horrified. The last thing on earth that they wanted was Joanne. And they gulped and choked mentally. And they said, oh, well, yes. And they thought about it, and I'm sure they thought, what in the world can we do? We don't want to offend this man because we hope that he might drill for oil in our country. And this is the first person that I went to see was George H.W. Bush. And my husband, God bless him, who was one of the greatest men I've ever known, Robert R. Herring, set up the meeting, and I had 15 minutes with George Bush. Yes, he was vice president, but it was during the time before they moved into office.
So it was the transition period?
Transition period, that's it.
Okay.
So I went to his office, and he kept me 2 hours. So, but he listened very intently, and he didn't say anything.
She met with George Bush Sr. for 2 hours and he didn't say nothing? Okay.
President Zia gave me the highest medal that Pakistan could give, and they had a party for me in Washington, and Kissinger came, and all the very big important officials. I was James Baker, who was the presidential advisor, and so forth. So Jimmy, I had known all of my life, and he came up to me, and everybody thinks of him as so, and he is so distinguished and elegant, but he's got a very cute side. And he came up and he grabbed me by the arm and he said, we're going to give him a lot of good stuff.
Now, it just so happens that James A. Baker III's family firm, Baker Botts, was the primary law firm for Union Texas Petroleum. And the day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated president, his new chief of staff found the time to liquidate all of his Occidental Petroleum shares. Oxy at that time, as now, was publicly traded, while Union Texas was still privately held.
Somebody came to me and said, one of the generals, would you like to have a little account in Switzerland?
Later, Joanne told me, we turned to Charlie because he was an old friend of the oil business. Charles Nesbitt Wilson, the congressman from Lufkin, Texas, was holding over $500,000 worth of a company called Supron, according to his 1981 financial disclosures, and Supron, coincidentally, in the summer of 1982, just before Charlie Wilson made his first trip to Pakistan, was snapped up by Union Texas Petroleum. So, when Charlie Wilson made that trip to Pakistan, he was actually holding over $500,000 worth of Union Texas Petroleum.
So a benign dictator is a good thing. And America's got to understand that there's a long path to democracy. And in countries like Chile, Pinochet was wonderful. And you know what he did? He just used Milton Friedman's methods, and he restored Chile. And I sent General Zia all of Milton Friedman's tapes.